they want anything else, they must go elsewhere. Number 6, he was a hard-working preacher. I don't want to go to a soft and leisurely man when I'm going through adversity and have him say, what you need is a vacation. That may be true, but if that's the sum of his counsel to me, I will go to another counselor. This man worked several lives, even though he died at 57. He did the work of 50 men, according to Lord Shaftesbury. He wrote, no one living knows the toil and care I have to bear. I have to look after the orphanage. I have a church with 4,000 members. Sometimes there are marriages and burials to be undertaken. There is the weekly sermon to be revised. There's the sword and trowel, the magazine to be edited. And besides all that, a weekly average of 500 letters to be answered. This, however, is only half of my duty. For there are the innumerable churches established by my friends, with the affairs of which I am closely connected, to say nothing of the cases of difficulty which are constantly being referred to me. At his 50th birthday celebration, they listed 66 institutions he had founded and was overseeing. He typically read 6 books of substantial theology every week and could remember what he read and tell you where it was found. So forget all imitation right now. Just relax, okay? I used to read history for imitation purposes, and now I read it for gratitude that God creates such impossible people to admire. There are a few things we might be able to imitate, but forget, he had a mind that was in a class by itself. He often worked 18 hours a day. David Livingstone, the missionary, asked him one time, how do you manage to do 2 men's work in a single day? And Spurgeon replied, you have forgotten there are 2 of us. And I think he meant Colossians 1:29, where Paul said, I labor, striving according to his power, which mightily works within me. There are 2 of us. Spurgeon's attitude towards sacrificial labor would not go over today, where wellness is a great priority. He said, if by excessive labor we die before reaching the average age of man, worn out in the Master's service, then glory be to God. We shall have so much less of earth and so much more of heaven. It is our duty and our privilege to be exhausted or to exhaust our lives for Jesus. We are not to be living specimens of men in fine preservation, but living sacrifices whose lot is to be consumed. He will qualify that in a few minutes, but that was the temperament of his life. I think the word indefatigable was created for people like Spurgeon. Finally, number 7, why Spurgeon? He was a maligned and suffering preacher that makes him a prime candidate for counseling me in my question. And I have 6 ways or so that he was maligned and suffered. Number 1, he knew the everyday homegrown variety of frustration and disappointment of lukewarm church members. He said, you know what one cold-hearted man can do if he gets at you on Sunday morning with a lump of ice and freezes you with the information that Mrs. Smith and all her family are offended and their pew is vacant? You did not want to know of that lady's protest just before entering the pulpit, and it does not help you. Or perhaps worse, after the sermon, what terrible blankets some professors are. Their remarks after a sermon are enough to stagger you. You have been pleading as for life or death, and they have been calculating how many seconds the sermon occupied and grudging you the 5 odd minutes beyond the usual hour. I tell you, it is a cold thing to the soul to pour your heart out and have somebody say, "Why did he stand in front of the candles when he sang?" Number 2, he also knew the extraordinary calamities that befall us once in a lifetime. October 19, 1856. The music hall, the Royal Surrey Gardens, 10,000 people gathered to hear him preach. He's 22 years old, and someone in the service cries, "Fire!" And there is a huge panic and a stampede, and 7 people are crushed and killed, and dozens are hurt. And the press rips him to shreds, and he must be carried away. And he says, "Perhaps never soul went so near the burning furnace of insanity, and yet came away unharmed." And not all of his friends believed he came away unharmed. One of his friends and biographers said, "I cannot but think from what I saw that his comparatively early death might be in some measure due to the furnace of mental suffering he endured on and after that fearful night." Number 3, Spurgeon also knew the adversity of family pain. He married Susanna Thompson on January 8 in the same year of the Surrey Gardens calamity. They immediately became pregnant, and the twin sons, were born the day after the calamity. She never had another child. There was, I can't track it down exactly, and they probably didn't have the categories for understanding it, but in 1869, the boys were born in 56, 1869, what's that, 13 years later, the father of modern-day gynecology, James Simpson, did a very unusual surgery attempting something for Susanna, and it did not work. There was a cervical problem. She became an invalid at age 33 and basically rarely left the house, and for the last 20 years or so of his ministry never heard him preach except on rare occasions. Therefore, on top of all of his other problems, he had a sickly wife who stayed at home. She was not a morose wife by any means. She developed what she could, a ministry, and Doug Nichols brought this copy of lectures to his students and gave it to me, bless his heart, this morning, and it's got her signature in the front here. What she did was she would send out books to pastors all over the world, and so here's one to James Beresford, presented by Mrs. C.H. Spurgeon, October 1891. This is her ministry, right out of her hand. She held this book in her hand. Isn't that wonderful? I can't believe you let me have this book. I said, "You're crazy." But crazy for Jesus. I knew that before. Number 4, Spurgeon knew unbelievable physical suffering. He suffered from 3 diseases: the gout, which is an inflammation of the joints, rheumatism, and Bright's disease, which is an inflammation of the kidneys. The first attack of gout came in 1869 when he was 35 years old, and it became progressively more frequent and worse, so that the last 22 years of his ministry, he missed at least a third of his Sunday morning preaching engagements at the tabernacle because of needing to recuperate or protect himself from standing too long. Lucian, this is a quote from Spurgeon to give you a glimpse into gout. Lucian says, I thought